Hey there, it's Kari at StudioR12 Stencils, and today we're going to show you how to add a little spark to this pumpkin project and turn it into a patriotic one. These surfaces are part of a new collection of fall standing surfaces that we have released in 2024, and we have several different shapes and sizes of pumpkins and different fun things that you can use to stand vertically rather than hanging things on your wall. However, when we released these, we started coming up with some different ideas of how you could use them for different seasons. We love to give you the option to change out your projects for the seasons or for the holidays so that you don't have to keep buying them and storing them. You can just use the back. So today we are going to paint the backs of these pumpkins and make them into a really fun patriotic project for Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day. You can keep it out all summer long. So how this project works is it comes in several different pieces, and I have already glued this base together. It comes in two pieces. We added a little bit of the Aleene's Quick Dry Tacky Glue. This is one of our favorites for gluing all of our wood pieces together. Let it dry for a bit, and we are going to set this to the side. Okay, let's take a look at how we are setting up our project for the day. We have a fun Let Freedom ring stencil that fits right on our small pumpkin. We also have some stars. Let's do those on the big one. And then we are going to use our gingham stencil. So this is a two-part stencil that makes a nice little gingham squares, but we're just going to use one part of it today to make some stripes. So we'll have our three pieces. The next decision that you'll make is colors. With your patriotic projects, you have some options. You can do a bright and bold, or you can do more of a country traditional. I think we're gonna do a bright bold today. It's not what I typically pick, so I'm jumping out on a limb. Another fun design that you could use on this project is our brand new firework stencil. Look how cute this is. Lots of different options for shapes of fireworks. And we used it in our new tall porch sign with stars and stripes in America. It is such a great patriotic project, and I'll share the link for you to check that one out. We have gathered all of our tools. Let's take a look at what we're going to use today. We are going to use some stretchy tape to make sure we tape down our stencil to our surface. We are going to use some of our jumbo daubers. These are a game changer when it comes to painting surfaces with some different corners and edges. I'm also going to show you how to use a foam brush to base coat. And then of course, we're going to use our favorite dome stencil brushes. We're going to start with the base coat of our small piece. And I am thinking when we do this, with our dry layout, you'll also want to think about colors. So the stripes need to be red and white. I think for the stars, I want to do a white background, and then we can do blue and red stars to bring it all together. And then we will do our blue for our Let Freedom ring with white words. And then I might do a yellow star here. We'll decide if we want to just do it all white or if we want to do it yellow. So I'm going to start with our jumbo dauber. It is a really dense sponge, and you get your paint on your sponge, and then you come over to your project and just do a tapping motion. Just like when we do our stenciling, I do recommend doing a little bit of offloading for your base coat, especially when you are in the areas of the edges. So when you're in the middle of the project, you don't necessarily have to offload as much, but one reason that we are using the jumbo dauber for our base coat rather than the foam brush is because we have a little bit more control and we can keep those edges clean. I'm going to show you how to do one of them with a foam brush and some of the issues that you might run into, and then how you can fix it. You can see here I did not offload before I came onto this portion, and now it is really wet and goopy compared to the top that I did offload. And then you can also see we're getting a little bit of a texture that we're having to work out quite a bit to make sure that it is nice and smooth. So that's one reason that the offloading is really beneficial even for the base coating when using this type of applicator. So we are done with our jumbo dauber for the blue. We just did one coat. The blue covered really beautifully. And we are going to throw our jumbo dauber into the water. It is really important that you keep your brushes and your sponges wet until you have a chance to clean them out. That is the best way to preserve them. We have videos on how to clean your brushes, how to clean your sponges. You never use soap with your sponge. There's a little place right here to put your fingers in the back of the jumbo dauber. We like to put a bottom of a brush into that space and then sink it into the water. If you just throw it into the water, it will flip up on its top and then the sponge will be outside of the water, and the paint will dry and it will get crunchy and you're gonna be really sad. But if you keep it submerged into the water, you can squeeze it out, clean it out, and it'll be good as new once it dries. Now we're gonna head on to our second surface, which is our white surface. And I'm going to show you painting this one with a foam brush. So we love these polyfoam brushes. It has a little bit of a base that goes all the way up almost to the tip, which makes it so that it doesn't flop around. So I'm getting paint on our foam brush. And when we do areas like this that are really small, you'll have to get on the very edge or tip of your foam brush and not push very hard. We like to, when we're on the edge that's away from us, do a push away from the edge. We never want to pull our sponge toward the surface. That's what helps keep the edges clean. So I'm pushing away here. Now I'm gonna show you how to do it where it's gonna get messy. So if I was coming to the edge and I was pulling, see how we got some on the edge here? There's also some in the corner, and in these corners, it can be really hard to get it cleaned up. So if you notice that you are starting to get some paint along the edges, then you can go ahead and wipe it with your finger, and then once we are completely done base coating, I'll show you how to fix it. All right, we have 3 layers of paint for our base coat on this pumpkin, and I was very careful. However, I do have some issues here around the edges. The base of the pumpkin was really hard to paint with the foam brush due to the size. So that's a checkbox for the jumbo dauber, is that you do have more control of it, and the dome shape and the rounded surface just really gives you the ability to put it exactly where you want it. So now what do you do if your edges get a different color? Most of the products and surfaces, most of the surfaces that you get from StudioR12 will go ahead and have the black burnt edge. If you get a surface from somewhere else and it has a natural edge, you might want to paint that anyway. We like the black edge, especially when we are doing reversible surfaces, because it just gives it a uniform look. If you have the orange pumpkin and then a white edge, it might stand out a little different. We always think about the edges when we are thinking about what color we are going to paint a project if we're going to reverse it, and we typically go with black. So if you do need to clean up the edge, we are going to go into our black paint, and I am going to use the polyfoam brush for this because it has the nice point. So I do like the point for this. I have quite a bit of white over here. So I'm gonna get some black paint on the tip, and then I'm just going to run it right across the edge. I always tend to get it on the top of the surface when this happens. Couple things that you can do is you can wipe it off. You can use the click eraser. It does not work if you don't put it in water, but when you put it in water, you can then go to the top of your surface or to your project that you just painted and erase that fresh paint. So the edge is now cleaned up. It's white on top, just how we want it. But I think that using the jumbo dauber from the get-go and not having to worry about that is probably my choice. So this third one is going to be red and white stripes. So there is some thought that needs to go into a project that is going to have stripes. You'll need to think about the colors that you're going to use and which one you want to use as your base coat. I always choose to do the light color as my base coat. It's easier to paint a dark color over a light color rather than a light color over a dark color. You'll have to do a lot more layers and apply a lot more pressure if you're trying to do a light color over a dark. Today with this project, we're keeping in mind that we are using red and white. And a lot of times when you paint those colors together, it can turn pink. So if I would have done a red base and then done white over top, we would have to make sure that it is completely dry before we start painting our white stripes so that it won't turn pink. And that's another reason I'm gonna do white first and then do red over top of it. All right, so I have both of these white pumpkins base. I did base the big one with the polyfoam brush and I based the smaller one with a jumbo dauber. You might not be able to tell a difference on camera, but there is a difference in the textures of both of them. The one that was done with the polyfoam brush has more of a streak texture. The one that was done with the jumbo dauber has more of a round lifted texture due to the different types of applicators we used. So I'm going to grab a really fine grit of sandpaper. This is a 220, and I'm just going to very smoothly, not applying much pressure at all, go over both of these. And what this is going to do is it's going to even them both out so that they look similar with the different applicators that we use. Always run your sandpaper in one direction so that you don't cause crosshairs with your project. All right, so now it's time to stencil, and I'm going to start with the Let Freedom ring. It is our small one. It's easy, it's quick. It is Stencil Basics. With this, our stencil is smaller than our surface, so you can use a T-square on this to make sure you have it exactly where you want, right in the middle, or you can lift it or you can lower it. I think I'm going to lift it right to the top so that the Let Freedom ring is right in the middle. I'm going to tape my stencil down. I'm going to tape it down on the left corner, then I'm also going to tape it down on the top right. When you tape it down in two corners, you give yourself no wiggle room, which is exactly what we want. I don't know about you, but I hate having to replace my stencil after I peek or after it wiggles. I hate relining it back up, so I always try to do it good from the get-go. We are back into our number 27, our white paint. We have a dome brush. I am offloading most of the paint from my brush as I come to my project, and I still have a little bit too much on. You can always tell if you have too much because you will see swirl marks through your stencil if you have too much. You want it to look like a really light, dusty layer. And we talked about potentially doing this star in yellow. I'm going to go ahead and base coat it white, just in case we decide to do it yellow. So regardless, we're going to base coat it in white. But if we do it in yellow, you always want to have an undercoat if you're doing a lighter color over top of a darker color. And that lighter color underneath will give your color more pop. This undercoat, it'll give that yellow more pop and make it more bright compared to if we just painted it straight on top of the blue. Now, this stencil was really small. However, since we did a really light swirl for the first layer, it is already dry. And now I'm going in with a stipple for my second layer. You can continue to do swirls, you can continue to do stipples, whatever you prefer. I tend to swirl my first layer, just to get a nice good base coat. And then depending on the colors and design style of my project, I will either stipple or continue to swirl. I like the stippling because it goes quicker. And sometimes it can take up to 4 or 5 coats of swirls if you're just swirling. If I'm doing a mixture of stipple and swirl, I will do a swirl coat and then maybe 2 or 3 stipples. Now when you're stippling, so I can see I got a little heavy-handed on that R. I might have some bleeding under there. When you are stippling, you want to make sure that you are offloading a lot, and then you also want to be mindful that you're using more pressure. So when you're using more pressure, you are pushing the paint on harder and potentially increasing your chances of bleeding under. So I did my first layer of the star with a dome brush. However, since the star is a nice big open area, we can also come into it with our jumbo dauber, and it covers really nicely and really evenly. We don't like to use the jumbo dauber on words or things that are very small with stencils. Due to the rounded shape, we have a hard time getting into the corners, but with the larger areas, it works really well. And then you could even go back into the corners if you want and make sure that white paint gets all the way into that corner. All right, let's take a look. Ta-da! Let freedom ring. The R's okay. Now, I do have a little bit of a white line here that I ghosted just a little bit. And what that meant was I wasn't really paying attention when I was stenciling, and I was excitedly swirling and it went under the bottom of my stencil. So I'm gonna grab my click eraser, go back into my water, and just come across here where it looks like there's a little bit of a white paint, and just knock that back. All right, and then this one, I'm gonna set it aside. I'm not decided yet on if I'm going to do a yellow star, so we're gonna set it aside, see how it looks once the others are done, and then we'll decide if we wanna add to it. So next, let's come into our stripes. All right, so this stencil is bigger than the surface. And so what we're going to do when we tape it is I'm gonna tape it down here across this bottom piece, because that is going to go into the base. So that doesn't necessarily need to be painted. We won't see it. And then I'm going to tape it up here across the top of the pumpkin. So now our stencil is nice and stuck. When you are using stripe stencils, it is always a good idea to use an adhesive on the back of the stencil. So what that will do is you will apply the adhesive, and then the stencil will stick to the surface long enough for you to be able to paint it without it wiggling, because sometimes stripes like to wiggle when you're painting depending on how you do it. So let me show you how to do it without using the adhesive. I'm going to use, we're using our number 63, and this time I'm going into our ink sweeper. So the jumbo dauber is round and the ink sweeper is oval. And it is a perfect shape to fit right inside these stripes. We are going to come and add some to our ink sweeper. And once again, I'm offloading. Now with this surface, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed or how you are positioned, you can move the surface around. And we're just going nice and slow along the edge of our stencil. With stripes, you have to be careful if you are swirling not to pull up the stencil, and that's where that adhesive comes in. You can just tap real slow across the edges, and this is definitely one that you'll want to take your time with. I'm also holding the stencil down since I did not use the adhesive. So I'm just walking my fingers along the stencil as I use it. So I'm almost done with my first layer of the red stripes, and I have noticed that there's a couple places along my project that have little specks of black. The last time this ink sweeper was used, a really dark paint, a black or a navy, was used on this, and it was not washed out completely. So because it wasn't washed out completely, some black is coming onto my project. So you'll want to make sure that when you are washing out your sponges, you want to keep them under the water until you are ready to clean it. And then when you clean it, you run it under the water and you just squeeze the top of the foam until it runs clear. So when it runs clear, that means all of the paint is out. However, these are things that you'll want to keep in mind so that they don't cause problems on future projects. So now we got a couple more. Both of them are a lot cleaner. I'm going to start with this one, and then we will go back into our stencil, and we will be able to cover up the issue that we found with the black specks. Okay, we did 2 layers of red paint on our stripes. Let's peel it off and show you what we got. Ta-da! So if you want something really bold, you can do a couple more layers. One thing to know about yellows, reds, oranges, pinks, they don't always have a lot of pigment in them. So do not get frustrated. You will have to do lots and lots of layers if you want those colors to be really bold. There are a couple things to note. There are a couple little spots that to the naked, untrained eye, you might not notice, but being the one who paints them, you are going to notice the imperfections. So there are a couple little spots that have a little bit of bleed under. So that is a check in the box for using an adhesive with stripe stencils. The stencil did move around a lot when I was doing the ink sweeper, and I found myself having to hold it and having to go really slow. The faster I went, the more that the stencil pulled up because there was wet paint on it. So you can go into your click eraser. Today's video is brought to you by using the click eraser, and you can just go along the edge and very lightly clean up those edges if it is something that will bother you. Now, when we were finishing this, Steve and I had a conversation of what color should we paint the top. So we left it white, but I want to hear from you. What color would you have painted it? Would you have painted it red and brought the red all throughout? Or would you have painted it a black? Would you have left it white? I don't know that there's a wrong answer here. I don't know that I won't change it, but as for right now, we are going to keep it white and we are going to move on to our last one. Okay, so now we're coming on to our third pumpkin, and we are going to bring this color story together with the red, white, and the blue. So we are going to do some of our stars as blue and some of our stars as red. Now, this surface is bigger than our stencil, so you do have some options. You can place the stencil right in the middle. However, I want to carry my stars all along it, so I'm going to bring it just up to the top to kiss this, and then once we are done, I will move my stencil down. I personally love a stencil that is bigger than my surface so that I do not have to move it. I actually almost painted the stars on a different surface because I did not want to have to do a repeating pattern. So we are coming into our blue. I'm going to add a little more red paint. So once again, we're using the 63 as our red and the 75 as our blue. Okay, so my bottle of red paint is very messy, and we are getting ready to paint on a white surface. If you are painting on a white surface and you have different colors of paint on your hand, there is the potential that you can transfer it over to your project. So I'm going to wash up my hands before I work on this one. Hands are cleaner than they were, and we are going to start with the red, getting a little bit on our dome brush, coming over to our paper towel, and I am going to go ahead and stipple here. Once again, this is personal preference, but when you are painting patterns, patterns can get tedious. If you are doing a pattern and using all one color, you can still do that swirl and it takes no time. When you have sharp edges, like the edges of the stars here, if you are swirling, you'll want to swirl in one direction for the first layer and then swirl in the other direction for the second layer. That will help fill in those corners. So for this, I'm not gonna have any rhyme or reason. I'm gonna do some blue and I'm gonna do some red, and I'm just going to decide as I go. This is something that you can prep and think about as you go. This would potentially be a good time to get a marker, a Sharpie marker, and you can write on the stencil, do an R and a B so that you know what you want to paint them. And then that can be wiped off with a stencil with just some alcohol. Okay, are we ready for the reveal? We have 2 layers of paint. I'm gonna pull this up and ta-da! We have some beautiful stars. I am going to blow dry this before I move my stencil down, just to make sure that everything is nice and dry, because if not, if there's anything wet on your background and you move the stencil, you could potentially drag some of that paint, and trying to get red paint and blue paint off a white background is terrible. All right, so now we're just going to move this down. So you can either reposition it and do exactly where it was and just move from top to bottom, or you can pick and choose. I think I'm just going to reposition just for ease in making decisions. And we're gonna tape it back down. And now the bottom is not taped because if we do any taping, it's going to pull it up and make it bunch. So we are just going to be very careful as we come into our paint, and we are going to hold down on the stencil since it's only anchored in one place. And I'm actually going to choose to do red on this one, even though I did blue on it last time. And do red on this one. And then we'll do a little blue in here. I kind of got a little into my red, so I'm going to get another paper towel. I'm gonna add a little more blue, make sure there's no purple on my project, and come into my blue stars. You will want to make sure, if you are using a stencil that has already been used once, that the paint is completely dry, because if that blue would have still been wet and I start stippling, then I could have gotten some blue. You'll also run into this if you are using a stencil that had white on it previously and then you are trying to use red. It will almost every time give you pink instead of red. All right, I do have a couple of spots that look like they have holes, so I'm going to bring a couple of small stars here, and I'm just going to hold this stencil down and just fill in a little bit of the gaps. And that is one of the cool things about pattern stencils, is that you can put them wherever you want. I am being very careful. You might have noticed that I didn't offload like I normally do, and I just did some taps. I did not want to remove my hand from the project because I had the stencil exactly where I wanted it. So check box for why you tape down stencils rather than hold them down. And then I'm going to add a small blue star right here. One thing you'll need to think about when you are doing the placement of the small things is that when you're only painting one small star, you don't have the dry time of painting the rest of the stars to let it dry. So you will either need to be patient and wait for it to dry, or use your blow dryer, because if it is still wet when you try to go back and do that second layer, you're going to dig a hole. We have videos on how digging those holes happen, how to prevent it, how to fix them, but you will really want to let it dry before you go to that second layer so that it comes up nice and bold. Ta-da! All right, I think we are good to go. Let's see how it all comes together. All right, are you ready for the big reveal? Let's show how to transition this from Halloween to Ta-da! We now have a really fun red, white, and blue stars and stripes 4th of July project, so now you can use this in your home for multiple seasons. If you like this video and want to have some more fun, be sure to subscribe to the StudioR12 Stencils YouTube channel and join us live every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern for a Q&A with our artists to talk about painting, stencils, crafting, and DIY projects.